Jesus way,
oh, the Jesus way,
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way,
Oh, the Jesus way,
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace begin with me. Gonna beat my sword
Gonna beat my sword
into a plow.
into a plow.
Gonna beat my sword
Gonna beat my sword
into a plow.
into a plow.
Gonna beat my sword into a plow. Christ is king in my life now. May his peace begin with me.
The March 2014 edition of The Messenger, the Church of the Brethren's monthly publication, featured an article about the poet William Stafford. It referred to William Stafford as a Brethren treasure. He was a conscientious objector during World War II and spent 3 years in work camps run by the Church of the Brethren. He later worked with the Church of the Brethren in Elgin, Illinois, and Church World Service. Hello, I'm Brent Carlson. Welcome to Brethren Voices. William Stafford was a faculty member of the English department at Manchester College in his mid-50s, an author of over 50 books of poems. He was Oregon's Poet Laureate for many years. In 1971-72, he served as poetry consultant for the Library of Congress. Today, we have one of his sons, Kim Stafford, with us. Kim, it's so good to have you with us on Brethren Voices.
Good to be here, Brent.
It's so marvelous to have you in our studio because I have heard you at poetry readings where you read your poetry and your father's poetry, and you have been doing that a lot in this last year.
Yeah, I've been all over the centennial of the old man's birth.
And people have been celebrating that all over Oregon and other places as well.
Yeah, it's a mystery that, 21 years after his death, he had 6 new books coming out last year. He's a very busy guy.
Yeah, amazing. And I think we have one of them right here, Ask Me.
Yeah.
And you were the editor of this book.
Yeah, I was the editor, and I love this photograph of my dad. His face, he's getting older. He was 79 when he died in 1993. But he still has this innocent, sort of childlike readiness for the next poem.
I'm going to ask you to read a little bit of the poetry in this book a little later.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of fascinated about the whole Brethren connection because your mother was really the Church of the Brethren legacy, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, my mother was raised in the Brethren Church, born in Nebraska, and grew up in Glendale, California. Her dad was a minister in the Brethren Church there, and she went to Laverne College, Brethren College. And then she met my dad, and when they moved to Manchester in the mid-50s, my father told me later, I outflanked all of Dorothy's relatives by joining the church. I think that's such an interesting verb.
Yes, yes.
He'd been surrounded by these Brethren relatives on going back to the Midwest, and so he joined the church. My mother was a little puzzled by that. But he had gone to every church. His family moved a lot when he was young, and they would always attend the closest church. So he didn't have a particular affiliation until 1955 when he joined the Brethren Church.
So when you say the closest church, that would mean the closest...
In the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood, not necessarily Church of the Brethren.
Yeah, that's right.
And then, so somehow he formalized that relationship in 1955.
Yeah, well, he was teaching at Manchester College, and I guess he decided it was time.
Okay. Well, I'm curious about your mother's history because we have some pictures of her childhood.
Yeah.
And she grew up on a farm.
Yes. She was born on a farm in Gage County, Nebraska, near Beatrice. The closest town was Pickerel, I believe. So she was born at home, and she attended the local church. And her father, Harrison France, as a young man, the family story is he had been called to the ministry. He was the oldest of 5 when his father died, and so he was a very hardworking man. And he received the call when he was out in the fields. So he went then to McPherson College, and he went to seminary in Chicago and became a pastor.
Wow.
So my mother was raised in, serious Brethren household.
Was he a full-time pastor? Because I know they had part-time pastors in those days.
You know, there's a story about him that my Aunt Helen, my mother's older sister, tells, that he was not a very good preacher. I mean, he was a very, very good man, but not very eloquent. But he was so nice. And she said one evening service, he was preaching on the text, "When 2 or 3 are gathered in my name." And there were only 2 or 3 people in the sanctuary that night. And my aunt said he was really on that night. He really understood that part.
And because he was in the midst of that spirit. And there was
Yes. Yeah, he was very devout, very, very service-oriented, just more of a farmer than a preacher, I guess.
Yeah. There's an interesting story in this article in the Messenger about your father visiting the work camp in Los Prietos,
Yeah,
California,
Los Prietos.
with your mother.
Well, here's how it happened. So my mother, this is 1943, and my mother had just had a date with an army man the night before. So, the war's on, and my mother goes out on this date. And at one point in the evening, she said to the soldier, "How do you feel about killing people?" And the soldier said, "Well, I try not to think about that." And my mother thought, "That's not the man for me."
No.
So the next day, her father said, "Dottie, I'm going to go preach to the boys in camp. Would you like to come along?" So she went along, and they went, over the mountain down into the Santa Ynez Valley near Santa Barbara, and Reverend Harrison France preached to the boys, and my mother performed a little skit of some kind. She would never tell us what it was, some very silly thing, I believe. And after the skit, my father approached her and said, "Would you like to take a walk?"
Oh, bold.
And so they walked up into the hills, and the moon was full. And at one point, one of them began quoting a sentence from a Willa Cather short story about the moon. And the other one completed the sentence from memory. So here were these 2 Midwesterners in California in the middle of the war who recognized they had common heritage. And so they were married very soon after that. My mom, I have so many stories, you've got to stop me, Brand, but she sent him a telegram to camp, and it was seized by the war censor.
Now, is this before they were married?
No, this is a couple weeks after they've met.
So okay.
So they had met, and she sent a telegram that said, "After long thirst, a draft of perfect good, signed Radiant." And the war censor thought, well, this must be some kind of code. And of course it was code. It was describing their first kiss, I imagine.
Oh, my.
So after only 3 meetings, my father said to her, "Isn't this the way it should always be?" And she said, "But you don't even know if I can cook." And he said, "But you don't even know if I can bring something home to cook." So that was the code of their proposal. And the rest is history.
Yeah. Well, your mother was a significant educator in her own way, and she had gone to Laverne College and graduated in teaching. And you said that was 1937, I think?
Yeah.
And your father graduated from University of Kansas about that same time.
Yeah, so they were far apart at that point.
But your mother taught school kind of in the shadows of your father's limelight for most of her life.
She was never in the shadow. My father said of my mother, "Dorothy has a whim of iron."
Oh.
She was no wallflower. She was at parties. She was the one who got things going, and as a teacher, she was very, very powerful influence. Many people have said to me, your mom really changed things for me. 4th grade, I went into 4th grade pretty unsure about myself, but your mom helped me be more confident. So she had a big impact. Yeah.
I actually met your mother at the Pond House one time when you were reading.
Uh-huh.
So I thought she was a lovely lady, but I didn't get a chance to talk to her. But
Yeah, well, can I tell you about her first day of teaching?
Sure.
So she got a job in the middle of the year, and she didn't know that this meant someone had quit. The kids were so obstreperous, so the teacher had quit. And so my mom came in as January, and she was walking into the classroom, and she said to the students in her sing-song, lilting voice, "We are going to have so much fun learning together." And one of the boys said, "Oh, yeah?" She struck him. She slapped him on the face. And then she was shocked. She had never done anything like that in her life. She sat down. There was dead silence. And she said, "Well, children, I'm going to have to go to the office. So will you be okay quietly here?" They all nodded. So she went to the office, and the principal said, "Well, Miss France, this is your first day as a teacher, and it may be your last. Who did you strike?" So she described the student, and the principal rolled his eyes. He said, "Oh, he had it coming." So here's this mystery. A peacemaker, a gentle daughter of a minister, struck a child in this moment of kind of the excitement of the first day. And she said, "We had a wonderful year after that. I never had any trouble at all."
With him or anybody else.
So see, she was no
I guess
shrinking
so.
violet. Oh, no.
You were born in 1948.
49.
49.
Yeah.
And your parents traveled around a bit in those early years.
Yeah.
And he was working at different jobs, and she was teaching school as best she could
Yeah.
get jobs.
Well, here's a good brethren story. So the reason we went to Manchester, my father was teaching at Lewis and Clark, and he'd been there for 5 or 6 years, and this incident happened that some members of the football team broke into their professor's office and stole the answers to the final exam, passed them around to everyone on the team. So the professor saw that they had cheated, so he flunked them all, and this meant they couldn't play football. So the coach came to the faculty meeting and beat up the professor right in front of everyone. And no one said anything except my father and the smallest member of the faculty, a gentleman named Hideo Hashimoto, who taught religious studies. They stood up, they stood in front of this man, and he looked at the two of them, and he went after the littler one, Hideo, and he chased him up to the manor house. My father waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. So he quit, moved to Manchester.
In protest because...
In protest, yeah. So, what do you do if you're a pacifist and the system isn't working? Well, you go away for a while. He circled back after a couple of years, but that was
interesting stand for what is right.
Yeah. Someone asked him, what writer has had the greatest influence on your writing? And he said, "My mother had a greater influence than anyone." His mother was minimally educated, soft-spoken, partially deaf presence in his life, but very alive to who he was. I think very welcoming. Maybe we should put in here the story about his first day in school.
Oh, please.
Hutchinson, Kansas. He went off to school, and when he came home, his mother could tell Billy was upset, And she said, "Well, Billy, how was school today?" And little Billy said, "Well, it was okay, but except at recess, there were these two black children, and the other kids were taunting them. They had them sort of against a fence there, and they were saying things to them." And Ruby, his mother, said, "Well, Billy, what did you do?" "Well, I went and stood beside them." Now this seems very key to me. You don't fight, but you don't turn away.
And you're 6 years old in the first grade, and he had that kind of moral character at that point.
And I think he probably got that from both his parents. They were both very good people. Years later, when my father was called before the draft board, And they were, here were these three retired military gentlemen sort of grilling the young inductees.
Now, this is just in time frame. He's already graduated from college. He's in graduate school.
He's in graduate school.
He's been drafted. He's made a stand as a CO and applying
That's
for
right.
status.
Yes.
And they've called him for an interview.
They've called him for an interview, and they said very sternly, well, where did you get this idea that you have the right to decide not to kill other people if your country requires it? And my father suddenly recognized that one of these gentlemen on the draft board had been his Sunday school teacher when he was a child. And he said, well, sir, you may not recognize me, but I remember you so well. You taught us the Ten Commandments, and you taught us values that we do not kill each other. And you were a very good teacher, sir. And I cannot take part in war in any form. What my father said, looking back on that time, is all his teachers were pacifists growing up, coming out of World War I, the horrible things they'd seen. And he was surrounded by no combat, no war. And then overnight with Pearl Harbor, the country changed. So I think he felt very conservative in his own life, that from childhood through the war on through the rest of his life, he had the feeling of connection with other people rather than strife.
He gets the CO status, and he's assigned to the community public service.
This civilian public service, as you know, run by the three traditional peace churches.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
So what happened was the Society of Friends, the Quakers, and the Brethren Church and the Mennonites said to the U.S. government, "We'll take care of these boys. We'll create camps. We'll have them do work of national importance, and we'll pay them each $2.50 a month, and we'll organize the camps under your direction." Well, it so happened that the head of the Selective Service, maybe you know this, was a Mennonite.
I didn't know that.
General Hershey.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Famous. I
who
know
was
the name.
still the head of Selective Service in Vietnam. He had that kind of longevity. And so he was a military person, but he had a Mennonite background, so he had a personal interest in the COs. And so he had a kind of a benign influence over the establishment of these camps. So here are all these pacifists, some of them fundamentalist, backwoods, Appalachian, Ten Commandments is all I need to know. Harvard PhDs who had come to their pacifism through philosophy, a wide variety of people, all together in these camps for the duration of the war.
And that became a very, very significant thing. And I've been reading this book, which is the stories that have came out of your father's experiences.
Yeah, Down in My Heart. It was my father's first book, 1947. It was published, still in print.
Published by the Church of the Brethren Press.
Yes.
And became his
master's thesis.
But he talks about being in a world where suddenly the culture has changed, but his values and the things that he felt were right hadn't changed. So how does he function in a world that's suddenly turned upside down?
Well, I think one thing I learned from both my parents is you may be in an environment that's overwhelming. You're not going to prevail. Humane qualities are in the minority, and they're, you may be alone, but you stand. That doesn't change what you do. You don't. You're not a wind vane. You don't go the way the wind's going. You think you know what's right, and you live by that.
There's another thing about writing that it was interesting about your father, because he actually did many, many different kind of things and didn't settle on writing till he was like 40 years old.
That's right.
What I read
says
he worked in sugar beets, he worked in oil refineries,
Yes.
he worked in the forest.
Construction.
Construction.
I'll tell you a little story about the sugar beet fields. Do you know what a short hoe is?
I think so, but
yeah,
I'm
the
not
short hoe. The reason you have a short hoe is you have to bend down to use it. And so the field boss can look out over the field. Anyone standing up isn't working. If you have a long hoe, you can sort of, mark time.
Oh,
You
really?
have a short hoe. And so my father, he always included that in his Vita, chopped sugar beets
It's with a short hoe.
with a short hoe.
And the people who know would know that that's
Yeah.
hard work.
He was, he really thought of himself as an ordinary person, kind of a working person. And his poetry was common language, nothing fancy. His advice to writers is if you're writing and you get stuck, lower your standards and keep going. You're not trying to be eloquent. You're trying to be truthful. It's a very different undertaking. Okay, I'd like to read a couple poems from a book called Prairie Prescription. These are poems about Nebraska and my mother's family heritage. And this first one is about her father, Harrison, France. So this is back about 1890s in Nebraska. It's Called from the Corn. My grandfather, orphaned at 8, oldest of 5, plowed through chores Nebraska offered in spades. Winter mornings when the cows called him out from the stove-red kitchen to ringing pails flecked with cream, stall worn to gleam like a throne, hickory-handled manure fork sunk in steaming wealth the corn would beg for when summer came. The scythe snath mended so often, the baling wire wound around the handle was polished silver by hands so long gone their names were biblical. To the harrow our stony field had punished tooth by tooth, where the team dragged it west, north, east, south, in the squared spiral, ending at dusk, where his lone hunch centered the survival of the clan. All this until one chill dawn the sky caught him by the hair, yanked him upright from despair, sun drilled through head to heart, withered almost seed hard by privation, whispered glory to the boy in that moment become minister, summoned to labor in the vineyard of souls in far California, where an orange could fill your calloused hand. After that, the farming life was metaphor, he preached, toil and harvest, seed and bounty, frozen dawn and firelight, for the faithful in a sun-filled church at Glendale. All I really remember, his giant hands grown smooth in prayer, when he took your little fist and stared into your soul. So that's my grandpa, Harrison, France. Great old man. And this other poem from this heritage from my father's side is a story about my father, William Stafford. It's called Blue Brick from the Midwest. After my father collapsed, like a bolt of light toppled without a word, I was the one to enter his study, find a jagged note to our mother he scratched as he reeled, the freight train of his departure hurtling through his heart, and all my love. A sentiment he did not speak in 79 years as tough customer, affable but stern, inert when grief came, reserved as granite when my brother died, cracking plaintive jokes when we trembled in the hospital, mother going under the knife. His way was trenchant, oblique. He distrusted those who talk about God, preferring to honor the holy with a glance, a nod, or silence. Delving deeper, the day he died, we found in his sock drawer under that scant set of flimsy raiment, the fetching photo of the flirt, our mother, coy at the sink, looking back over her shoulder, dressed only in an apron with a big bow. No fool like an old fool. And delving deeper back at the bottom file, the niche where one would hide the stuff of blackmail, I touched the blue brick of love letters our mother had sent him when they courted in the war. Brittle leaves kissed snug together and bound with string. The trove he had carried in secret through every move since 1943. She knew them not, nor had his. "Oh, Billy," she said. "Father, early years taught your way with the heart's contraband. When the dirty 30s blunted your bravado, tornadoes snatched your friends, the war your tenderness, and left you with these secrets hoarded for us to find when you were gone." Once he was giving a reading, and he read one of his little ordinary language poems, and someone from the audience helplessly spoke up. You know, you're not supposed to do this, but after the poem, she said, "I could have written that." And he looked down and he said, "But you didn't.
Yeah.
But you could write your own.
Uh-huh.
You could write your own."
That's actually become a famous quote. I've heard that before.
Yeah.
And what a nice, he could have done a lot of things to respond to her.
Yeah.
But what a nice way to do it, to say, well, maybe so, but that's the
think
one I write. You could write one too.
Yeah, that idea, you could write your own. That's William Stafford, the teacher, you know, the companion of other seekers, the one who's, you know, after my father died, my mother said, you know, Bill is well known for his poetry, but I think his more lasting impact will be as a teacher, as someone who welcomed everyone into the studio of creation.
Kim, thank you for being with us on Brother Voices.
Thank you, Brent.
It's been a delight.
Delight.
For Brethren Voices, this is Brett Carlson,
This is Kim Stafford.
wishing you peace.
Who tread the path he trod shall be called the friends of God. May his peace begin with me. Oh, the Jesus way
Oh, the Jesus way
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way
Oh, the Jesus way
is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace be